I love a good solo hunting adventure. Sure, going out with buddies or family makes for a great time around the campfire, swapping stories and having fun. But there is something so satisfying and adventurous about striking out all on your own, just you against nature. The quiet, the solitude, the time to just think and pray and be on your own. It's wonderful until something goes wrong. Well, here's the new situation. I left camp. I was going to take this road up a ways to where there's like 4 different tanks within a mile of each other. I was going to do that as a check of bear activity. That if there's not any activity on any of those tanks, there's a couple of them that are kind of back in the wooded areas, then perhaps there's no bears around here and I need to rethink tomorrow's hunt plan. However, on my way out, I was taking it easy, I promise, and I broke another shackle on the Jeep. I've done this before, and now I'm stuck. So I'm trying to decide, do I limp it back to town? The exit to the highway is right here. I could take it easy, limp it there, get it fixed. Or do I try to limp it down this awful road that I just came down that broke it in the first place to pack up and load up camp and then limp it into town and see what's going on? So it's a little raw, it's a little fresh. I haven't figured out what I'm going to do yet. Maybe I'll call my wife, get her take on the situation, see how things are going at home. Right now I'm just sitting on the side of a dirt road like an idiot with no bears. Update. Just talked to my wife, who is very cool and understanding and a good person to like logically think through things with. I am walking back to camp and I am going to take a couple of loads on foot to pack my camp up and get it loaded up in the Jeep. Utterly exhausted, I limped the Jeep back into town, started calling and asking around and could not find the part I needed anywhere in the state of Arizona. I realized in that moment that my hunt was now done a full 2 days before it was supposed to end. And while I still love a good solo hunting adventure and will continue to take them over the years, I was reminded in this particular case just how important it is to have people around who can help you out. We tend to idolize the self-sufficient, lone wolf kind of man. But maybe he doesn't have it all figured out. Maybe the strongest man is the one who recognizes just how much he needs other people.
That hunt sucked, if you can even call it a hunt. I saw no bears, broke my Jeep, and went home 2 days early. Jeep's fixed now, it's here, everything's fine, I got to worry. Bears and I have an interesting relationship. I know most people probably have an interesting relationship with bears, but I now pursue them, try to hunt them. It's a great, on years when I don't get drawn for like an elk or a deer or something, it's an over-the-counter tag, and it's something I can go pursue. I take a buddy in a couple weeks for his first hunt trying to chase down bears, but they are so hard to find. They live in like the crappiest terrain you can find. They're very reclusive and kind of, they tend to walk around alone. They're real hard to find. But now I look for them, I get excited for them. When I first started spending time in the wilderness, the thought of them terrified me. And a lot of guys that spend time in the woods, they don't like to talk about this, but when you're first starting to set out on your own, and you find yourself like, okay, I'm solo hiking into wherever, I'm going to camp overnight, it's just me, it is a terrifying experience. We like to pretend it's not, like, no, I'm fine. It freaks you out pretty universally, and I'll just be man enough to admit it. My first ever solo expedition, I was not hunting, I was just, I had a wife and one kid at the time, and I started to feel that kind of primal angst. Like, okay, my life is at a desk, in an office in the suburbs, like I haven't been in the wilderness in a long time, I need to get out and do something. My wife is very cool, and I said, hey, I want to take a solo backpacking trip overnight into the Superstition Mountains. It's east of Phoenix, they're beautiful, we took a few trips there in Boy Scouts, and it was always my favorite mountain range. It's like, there's all these ghost stories and, Apache Indian attacks and just like crazy stuff, legends of ghosts and gold, and it's a beautiful mountain range. And I decided I wanted to go there for a quick overnight all by myself. My wife's like, well, you have life insurance, so sure, go ahead. If the worst happens, me and my new European model husband will just live off your insurance. It'll be great. That was really specific, I'm sorry about that. But she understood, she's like, okay, and I can tell she was trying to figure out how to ask this, but she was like, you know what you're doing, right? Like, you'll be okay? You know how to survive on your own? I'm like, of course! I was a Boy Scout! We were trained in living on your own and surviving in the wilderness, and in my head I convinced myself, like, no, I've totally slept on my own in the woods. Even though if I reflect on it, that trip, I think I was probably like 100 yards from the next kid. Like they took us into this controlled environment, like, okay, you're sleeping under the stars here, and then they would walk you a little ways, okay, you're here. And so as a boy, you're like, yeah, I'm sleeping alone in the woods, I'm amazing. But really in the back of your head, you're like, if something goes wrong, I can just yell and there's like scout leaders around and everything will be fine. This was actually gonna be my first, like, okay, this is me in the woods, and if something goes wrong, I've got to deal with it myself. So the spot I picked in the Superstitions is a place called Revis Ranch, which we were talking about. It's beautiful. I think a couple guys in here have probably been. It's this great, sad-ish story. Crazy old man in the 1800s, Elisha Revis, left his family and went into the middle of this mountain range and just started a ranch, a homestead. The foundation from his cabin is still there. There's old farming equipment. There's an apple orchard he planted that still produces apples. And there's the stream that runs through all year long. And though this range is a desert mountain range, the ranch is at such an elevation, you're in territory that looks like this. It's like a pine forest. It's beautiful. So I said, this is where I want to go. It's a 7 to 8 mile hike in, stay the night, I'll hike out, just me and Jesus and some rugged man stuff, and I'm going to come back a new person. But because I'm a Boy Scout and the motto is be prepared, I wanted to make sure I knew everything I was getting into. And so I was doing my research on the area and found out that it's not uncommon, because of the apple orchard and because of the elevation, to see bears sometimes. And so I thought, okay, bears, that's interesting. It was at a time I was young and poor enough that I did not own a pistol to defend myself with, and I wasn't going to haul my big bird shotgun in there, so I was like, okay, it's going to be me and a bear and my pocket knife. How am I going to handle this? And it dawned on me that I've always heard two things about what to do if you encounter a bear. I've heard, play dead, and then I've heard, like, make yourself look big and make a bunch of noise and scare them off. And a thought occurred to me that those are two diametrically opposed reactions. And if one of them is right, you really don't want to do the other one, because that's how you die. And so I went to the Google machine to figure out, please tell me, discovered a website called the Art of Manliness, because I'm so manly, I need a website called the Art of Manliness to teach me about bears. And it turns out the answer as to which one you do in the event of a bear sighting or encounter is that it depends. Super helpful, depends on the type of bear. Yeah, grizzly bears, we don't have them here, way up north. That's the play dead bear, because they're like over 1,000 pounds and super aggressive and will just destroy you. And so you cover your neck and curl in the fetal position and talk really loudly to Jesus in your mind, because you're probably about to meet him. Black bears, which we have in Arizona, much smaller, much more timid. They like look big, make a lot of noise, and usually they turn tail and run. And so I read that like, usually, okay, that means there's something that sometimes happens. Well, what do you do then? Like, if a black bear charges you, gets aggressive with you, you don't run, because you can't outrun it. You don't climb, because you can't outclimb it. You stand your ground and fight the bear. Yeah! Awesome! I'm not kidding. This is legitimately what the internet told me. They can't lie. What do they stand to gain? And so I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, fight the bear. So in my young male mind, there's you guys know this, there's like the wow, ooh, yeah, I hope that doesn't happen. But there's a small part of you that's like, I really hope that happens. Because man, don't you want just a bearskin rug on the wall, and people come to your house and they notice like the Bond villain scar you have down your face, and they're like, man, what happened to you? Like, that happened to me. But I killed him with my bare hands, and now he greets people when they come to my house. Like, I kind of wanted that to happen. I don't tell any of this to my wife, because I'm not an idiot. It's like, no, I'm just going to the woods, gonna be fine, gonna see a turkey or deer, something, don't worry about it. So I get all my gear, I pack in, it's a long hike, but it's beautiful. I get to this spot, and it's just this most beautiful surroundings. And I've set up my camp, and I fill up my water, and I've got a fire going, I'm cooking dinner, and some deer just walk through camp, and they don't care. They're like the deer around here, they're just like, hey, sup, buddy, and they just keep on moving. It is gorgeous, and I love it, and me and Jesus are talking. I'm like, this is exactly what I needed. And then it got dark. And once things get dark, things change. And I start being really aware that, like, okay, the last human being I saw was miles away. I am all alone in this mountain range. I've got all this bear stuff. Suddenly the bear fight that was going to be a cool story to tell. It's like, oh my gosh, people die when they fight bears. This is not good. And so I start having that, like, freak out moment. I'm sitting there by my fire just like, okay, this is Jesus, we're talking, because I am feeling how stuck I am. Like, I'm not hiking 8 miles in the dark back to the truck. I have to survive this night on my own, and I'm kind of freaking out. And about that time, I hear a little twig break in the tall grass behind me, which makes me just about wet my pants. And I whip around with a flashlight, and there's nothing there. I'm like, okay, just the winds, the grass, everything's fine. I'm just sitting there trying to control myself, and I hear about another stick snap, and I whip around with a flashlight. Okay, I've got an invisible demon bear that now is encroaching on my camp, going to kill me. And I'm heading this back and forth, like, be a man, it's just noise in the grass, it's fine. And every time, every 30 seconds, every minute, there'll be another snap. I whip around with my flashlight, and just, there's nothing there. And after about the 6th or 7th time, I'm between a panic attack and just like this overwhelming manly energy came over me, where I'm like, you know what, I'm a man. I am at the top of the food chain. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and just be scared like some sissy of this demon ghost bear behind me. I'm gonna deal with this, whatever it is. So right at that pinnacle of this moment of like this pep talk I'm giving myself, I hear a stick snap again. So this time I stand up from the log I'm sitting on, I whip my leg over and shine the light. I'm like, let's do this, bear! And a bunny rabbit jumps out of the grass at me. And I screamed like a little girl. Tripped over the log, almost fell into my fire, while little bunny Foo-Foo goes skipping off into the night. And I'm like, just that, like, where you've had all the adrenaline in your body dumped into you at one point, so I'm like trembling, and I sit back down, just evaluating how much urine is in my pants at this point. And just, like, it all hits me in a second, like, I just had the biggest freak out of my life over a bunny rabbit. I am not a man. And I just like, well, that's it, that's the night. And I crawled into my tent and just tried to go to sleep, just so deflated. Things were much different in the morning. It was like, oh yeah, this place is beautiful again. And I hiked out and went back home and said, yeah, honey, I'm a man. Don't worry, I fought a bear and everything's good. The wilderness is a beautiful place, and I'm much more comfortable now. I feel like I need to disclaim. I go hunting and camping alone, and like I'm much less jittery about the whole thing. But there's still something when you're alone and you know you're alone, that things get freakier. And I think that takes place that you step out of the wilderness into just regular everyday life. And when you're alone, like emotionally or spiritually alone, man, things can get freaky in a hurry. And because community is something that we are hardwired for. And as men, we don't like to admit it, but we desperately need it. And yet we still idolize this kind of rugged individual Marlboro man. That's one of the hardest words to say. You know, they're just that lone wolf kind of a guy. And some part of us thinks, like, that's what I need to be, but it's profoundly unbiblical and unhealthy. And so today I want to look at a guy in the Bible, Zacchaeus, very familiar story, weird name. We might call him Zach for the purposes of this morning. But this guy was desperately outside of community. And I think it led to the situation he was in. So Zacchaeus is found in Luke 19, if you'd like to follow along. But as usual, we're just going to kind of paraphrase this, and you probably heard the story a bunch of times. But Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. He's traveling along the road through Jericho. And the people of the town are all just coming out, flooding around. It's like a parade. Like they're just lining the street because they want to catch a glimpse of this guy who is just a legend in the area. Like they've heard of his miracles, they've heard of his teachings. Like he's just upsetting everything about their social norms. And so they want to just catch a glimpse of him. And Zacchaeus, we learn, is a chief tax collector of the region, which makes him one of the most hated individuals in town. Everybody hates Zacchaeus, and he runs up to try to get a look at Jesus, to try to join the crowd along the road. And we learn the second thing about him is that he is a very short individual, which I'm afraid to even talk about because I kind of got myself in trouble night one talking about average-heighted men in my history. But Zacchaeus is super short, can't see over the crowd. So he climbs up in a tree to catch a glimpse of Jesus, and as Jesus walks by, he looks right up at him and calls him by name and says, "Zacchaeus, get down. I need to go hang out at your house today." And Zacchaeus is overjoyed and climbs down the tree and just starts like skipping back to his house, leaving Jesus. And the people are indignant. They are upset. They are angry that Jesus has once again not done what they expected him to do, but he's going to be the guest of this notorious sinner, this most hated man in town. All these people lining the street that Jesus could have picked out and said, "Hey, let's go have lunch." He picks Zacchaeus, and they are super upset about it. And a couple months ago, I was studying this story and reading through it, and I just started to think, like, what is Zacchaeus' backstory? Because we first meet him in this moment. This is the first we ever hear of this guy, and he's already the chief tax collector. But I thought, like, how does a guy get there? Like, what can we maybe infer or try to imagine? Like, how did he get to this point in his life? And I think it's fair to assume, or kind of the story I cooked up in my head, is that if he is so extremely short that it's one of the main things the Bible tells us about him, which, man, that's a rough break for Zacchaeus. Like, can you imagine for a second, do you think Zacchaeus ever once considered the fact that 2,000 years after he died, children would gather on Sunday mornings to sing a song about what a wee little man was he? Yeah. Like, that's a rough break for Zacchaeus. That's torture. Poor guy. But he is a really short man, and I think it probably stands to reason was probably the short kid in school. And I'm not saying this is right, but what may typically happen to the little guy at school? Yeah, gets picked on, gets bullied. It's not cool, but it probably happened. And I bet Zacchaeus was kind of your standard short man syndrome guy. Like, over the years, got picked on enough, he just kind of had this chip on his shoulder, started to build up these walls and started to keep his distance. Thought, man, like, all the kids at school, all the people in my town, like, they're jerks. This is not fair to be treated this way, but he's getting picked on and starts to just not like people, to distrust people. And so I think that made him a prime target for the Roman government to come in as he gets to adulthood and offer him a job. And say, hey, we can make you rich if you're willing to kind of betray your countrymen and collect taxes on our behalf. Which the political, if you're not familiar with what's going on at this period in history, Rome has occupied Israel and said, like, hey, you can keep living here, but you're going to pay us some huge taxes now. And what they did is they would employ Israelites and say, hey, you go collect taxes from your countrymen, give us a cut. More often than not, the tax collectors would skim some off the top for themselves. And so they were traitors, they were cheaters, and just everybody hated them. It would be like if Canada occupied us, which I can't even say with a straight face, but let's say that happened, and then your next door neighbor comes knocking on the door with 2 giant Mounties behind him to collect these exorbitant taxes for Canada. You would hate that guy. And so that's what everybody felt about Zacchaeus. And so he is just more and more hated, and I think that creates this cycle where he is he's hated more, so he hates them more, so he cheats them more, so they hate him more, and it just isolates him to where he's got nobody in his life. To the point where he hears Jesus coming and goes and tries to catch a glimpse of him, and I don't think it's by accident that he couldn't get his way through the crowd to get a front row seat to see him. There couldn't have been that many people that he couldn't have forced his way through, and these were all Jews who knew the law, who knew what God said about mercy and about helping people, and they knew the right thing to do would be to, hey, let the little guy through. Like, hey, crowd surf that hobbit to the front of the line, and let him see Jesus. They knew that's the right thing to do, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were some guys who saw him coming and were like, ugh, this guy again. Actually went out of their way to kind of box him out, to keep him from catching a glimpse of Jesus, so that his only option was to climb up in a tree, which is probably a fairly embarrassing thing to do, if you think about it. In front of people looking and probably laughing and pointing like, little guy's got to climb in a tree. Like, it was rough. But that is what he was driven to, and what we see in the rest of the story is that one afternoon in community, Jesus comes to his house. Zacchaeus, probably invites some other tax collectors because he didn't have any other friends. Jesus came with his disciples, and he just spends an afternoon in community, and it transforms the man. He said, after spending some time with Jesus, he says, hey, I want all of my wealth, I want to give half of it to the poor. Just cut that off, just give that away. And if I've cheated anybody, which is really code for, hey, I've cheated some people along the way, I'm going to make restitution. I want to make that right. I will pay them back 4 times what I cheated them. And this is not Zacchaeus trying to earn Jesus' favor. This is a result of an afternoon spent with his Savior, and realize it, just feeling that conviction and that desire to make things right, that desire to be part of the community again. The desire to leave that life behind and say, I realize just how terrible this is, and I don't want to do that anymore, and I want to be a part of the community again. And so, for us men, I think what I've seen this weekend actually is that you guys, by and large, have a much firmer grasp on community and how important it is than a lot of guys I encounter. I work with and see and I'm friends with a lot of guys where we kind of know this in our heads, yeah, we should probably be in community, but the gravitational pull is to just focus on your stuff, live your life, go to work, be with your family, and we start to feel or live sort of spiritually and emotionally like we're just these lone wolf independent people. We don't actually connect in real, authentic, honest community. And I want to don't get me wrong, I think brief experiences of solitude are very healthy, and God can do a lot of great things through that. There's a show I love on the History Channel called Alone. Anyone ever seen it, familiar with it? I love that show and live vicariously through these people. But they take these kind of survivalist expert people, they drop them off in some remote part of the globe, they're miles from the nearest person, and they have 10 supplies they can bring with them, whatever they choose from a list, and they just get dropped off, and they're just trying to be the last man standing. They have a sat phone where they can tap out, or they can reach help if they get seriously hurt. But it's just, hey, live totally alone as long as you can, surviving off the land, and the last person standing gets $500,000. It's pretty amazing. But yeah, it sounds awesome. But what you see, what's so fascinating to watch is not just how they survive, but you watch more often than not. Some people get pulled out because they hurt themselves and they just have to call, hey, I need medical help. Some people get pulled because they've been there so long they're starving to death, and they do medical checkups on them once a week or so, and they say hey, if you're out here any longer, you're going to die. And so they pull them. More often than not, people pull themselves from the game because they're alone. Because once you can tell, once they start, they're doing all this voiceover and filming themselves, and you start hearing them talk about, I wonder what my family's doing back home, or they're having these deep thoughts about the kind of father they are or are not when they're back home. And once they start on that path, it's not long before they're tapping out and they're heading home. Because we are social creatures. That's how God designed us. What's also, I think, fascinating is these guys always seem to come out of this experience with these epiphanies, these aha moments, and they connect with Jesus, they connect with nature, they come out better people, because there's something healthy about a little bit of time in solitude, just you and Jesus talking. But we've always got to return to community, because that's what we need. Experiences of solitude are healthy. A lifestyle of solitude is dangerous. A lifestyle of solitude, when you are the lone wolf Christian especially, those guys never last. Trying to do this life on your own, trying to follow Jesus in the world we live in on your own never works out and leads to, there's just a list of bad things that happen. Some of the worst of which is you look at like depression and suicide rates among men, among like middle-aged men especially. It's staggering, it's depressing. I think that comes from just the isolated lifestyle we tend to live as a society, and more specifically men. Because at least for women, it's expected, like, yeah, you're supposed to like have your friends and communicate, and you talk about everything, and girls get together. And I've like caught wind sometimes of the incredibly detailed personal things my wife talks about with other ladies. I'm like, oh, you talked about that, did you? Okay, super. I figured you'd be pissed if I started, you know, having conversations with my guy friends about what we do in the bedroom. But apparently you and your ladies, like, cool, that's fine for you. Men have this different, like, we're just, no, we don't talk about stuff. I don't need anybody. Like, I'm strong, I'm alone. And so there's shame associated with even going to another guy and saying, like, hey, I'm struggling here. I'm alone. I feel lonely. It can be an embarrassing thing to say, but it's a necessary thing to say. It's a powerful thing to say. And what I've found is I've had a couple periods in my life where I just, like, I admitted that. I went to some guys who, like, I think we all have guys who are kind of friends, maybe they're church friends, and you know, like, if there's a disaster in your life, they're the guy you can call. But by and large, when everything's going sort of okay, you're just like, all right, yeah, I'll see you at church, I'll see you at Bible study, I'll see you, whatever. But they're kind of like your emergency buddies. And a lot of my closest friends live in different states now. Like, we connected and we're good friends, and now they're the friend that, like, we call each other once a year. And we pick up where we left off, and we talk, and it's great, like, yeah, okay, see you later, buddy. And that's it. We're not good at going to someone and being like, hey, could we, like, regularly connect? Like, I need to talk with you. I need to get some stuff off my chest, and I need to spend time with a couple other guys regularly, being open and being honest. And what if we admitted to each other that we actually need each other? That we didn't view that as a weakness, but we viewed it as a strength to have the guts to go and say to somebody, hey, I need you as a friend. I need you as a brother. I need you to help me. I need to talk with you. I need to get some stuff off my chest. And male friendships are difficult, and that feels really awkward, but I can tell you the couple times I've done this, where I found myself like, man, I'm lonely. Like, my best friends live in other states. I'm going through some stuff, and I need to just, like, I need to have someone to talk it out with. And I've gone to one of those friends who's like at church, like, hey, buddy, kind of friend, and just kind of laid it out there. I have never had that not come back with, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said something. Like, I feel the same kind of way. Like, let's be intentional about this. And then the gravitational pull is to do that for a few weeks and then, like, slip back into old habits. And it takes intentionality to keep that going. But man, to have that conversation, which is nerve-wracking and sort of embarrassing at first, the results are so worth it. So you get that off your chest and you stop feeling isolated. You stop feeling alone. You start like, okay, there's actually somebody who not only knows that I'm going through this, but relates and understands and is praying for me. And we're talking regularly, and you just stop feeling like an island. I think it's a sign of true strength to admit that you need somebody else, which we see all the time. I think this is a stupid example, but as a man, one of the hardest things, the stupidest hardest things for me to do, in the gym, bench press is probably the most dangerous thing, that's where you drop it on your throat and you kill yourself. But there is something so embarrassing about, like, hey, I'm gonna try to bench something that's a little heavy and probably a little dangerous. Let me find someone and say, hey, could you come stand here and just pull this off my chest if I start to die? And so usually, more often than not, I'm like, no, I got it, it'll be fine. And just like a few weeks ago, there's a guy in the gym who we're friendly with, or I'm friendly with, but I don't actually know his name, so I call him Indian Hulk, because he's Indian and he's a giant. Super friendly, we talk every time, still haven't caught his name because I'm a terrible Christian. But I was in one of these modes where I was like, okay, I probably should ask for help, I'll be fine. So I'm laying down, I'm a couple reps in, and I'm starting to struggle, I'm starting to hit that like, oh shoot, I really should have asked for help. And sure enough, Indian Hulk, like a superhero, bursts in and pulls it off my chest. And then encourages me, like, okay, get one more. And, like, helps me up, keeps me from dying, re-racks the weight, and then just tells me, he's like, hey man, like, don't feel weird, just ask anytime you need help. Like, just grab me, we'll do this. Like, no judgment, no nothing. And that's a total stranger with a pretty, surface level stupid thing. It's lifting weights. But I think on a more profound level, that's what I found happens every time I have a real conversation with a guy. I say like, hey, can we be a little more than just the Sunday, hey buddy, how's it going? Mm-hmm. And they're like, yeah, man, no judgment, anytime. Let's talk, let's do this. Let's live life together. And so what I would challenge you with this morning is, as we wrap this up, as we head to groups, which is the perfect thing to head to after this. I know some of you guys, your life is kind of built around community right now. Like, it's hardwired into what your life is, and that is so beautiful and so healthy. I would challenge you to keep that going for the rest of your life. But for those of us in here who are kind of like in that, yeah, I've got some buddies and some friends, and there's my emergency friend that I can call if all hell breaks loose. But I don't have anyone who's really like a deep, true friend. There's probably someone in your life who could be that, who actually wants to be that, who would be so relieved if you just mustered up the courage to start that conversation. Mm-hmm. Who is that guy? And start that conversation today. Even if they're not here, you got to send them a text and say, hey man, can we talk when we get back? Have that community in your life, because man, to live this life, to battle the stuff that we have to face every day, to keep staying true to what we know Jesus wants from us in a world that wants anything but that for us, we can't do it on our own. Let me pray for you guys, and we'll do whatever Chuck tells us to do. God, I thank you so much that you did not design us to be alone. God, that it actually breaks your heart when you see your sons trying to live in isolation. God, I pray for every man in this room, Lord, that those who are truly in community right now, God, that they would be disciplined to keep that a regular, consistent part of their lives. And for those of us who are maybe struggling in that area and just kind of feel sort of isolated, put a name in our head right now, Holy Spirit, of someone that you've already placed in our lives that we just need to talk to be more intentional with. And give us the courage to start that conversation. And God, I pray that as we engage in community and live the way you designed us to, God, that we would see exponential growth in our faith. Because that is how you designed us to grow, not alone, but in community. God, we love you. Thank you so much for this weekend, for these men. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen.